Radishes. Radishes grew in the garden soil, where all of the silverback beetles and green-shelled ladybugs would toil. One day in the month of May, it began to rain. The rainwater soaked into the ground like a sponge that the radishes grew beyond sprouts, forming into red bulbs under dirt mounds. The green-shelled ladybugs and silverback beetles ignored them, so they grew leaves of thick green with long stems, the prettiest ever to be seen. The garden soil grew dark at night and light during the day. Never did one leaf turn brown, yellow, nor die of gray. When people on the street would pass them by, some would say that the leaves looked too healthy and green and feared that they might die. But the radishes with their bright green leaves grew and never minded what some people might say or already knew. Then summer came as it always did, with its white hot sun blazing, and no more gray winter clouds to hide it where it once hid. But the radishes did not care and continued to grow, one after one, leaf after leaf, row after row. Then one day the gardener came out to inspect the sprouts, but glancing at the bright sun overhead, it filled the gardener's head with doubts. But to the gardener's surprise, there stood long leafy stalks, larger than life in size. The gardener carefully looked them all over and found one radish small and crying, not growing much, but trying. "What's wrong?" the gardener asked the small and crying radish. "I'm too small. I can't grow. Even though I try, it just won't show," the tiny radish answered back, sobbing. The gardener bent down and said, "Don't worry, little radish. You'll see. In time you'll grow big and strong, like your sisters next to you, lined up in rows of 3. The small radish looked up at the gardener and said, "Thank you. You are kind. The best in me only you can find." The gardener smiled and said, "You're a sweet radish. I'll call you Blair, because you have a lot to give, much to share." The gardener walked away. His work in the garden for the day was done. There were no more weeds to pull and no more water to run. Blair grew big and strong, the biggest radish in the garden by far and long. Her roots ran deep and her leaves grew wide, lightly touching the ground where the water would hide. Next to her grew her little sister, much smaller and weak, not much to look at, only a peak. Blair's sister was not red like all the radishes were. Nevertheless, they shared a link, which involved 2 roots and a green-shelled ladybug, so she named her Pink. The 2 sister radishes grew together, sharing their soil, roots, and water, through rain, sun, or any kind of weather. One day Pink noticed her sister absorbing her water and blocking her sun, and decided it was then that she should tell her what she had done. "Blair," Pink said to her sister, "you've been taking my water and sunlight share, and in my opinion, and no one else's, I don't think that you're being fair." Blair looked down at her from her stately mount and said, "Sister, you claim that I have not been fair, and that I have been taking all of your sunlight and water's share, but I can't help it. I need more water. The sun is blazing overhead, and the weather keeps getting hotter." Her sister nodded and said, "I'll tell you the truth, sister. You've been taking the share of water and sunlight from your other sisters, too. Just ask them. They'll tell you. Please give us our share of water and sunlight. Give us our due." Blair's leaves rustled in the wind as she said, "Sister, you are still young. You have much time to grow. But you just don't understand. You just don't know what I know." The gardener walked up and said, "That's true, Blair, but it's rude not to share, for all living things must be allowed fruit to bear. Just as you have done. Your time in the soil has come to an end, and your soil and roots to those yet to come now you must lend." The sweet radish called Blair took one last look around and said, "If this must be, will I again behold my sisters in rows of 3? The gardener nodded and smiled. Everyone will see one another again, when one cycle ends and a new one starts to begin. And with that said, Blair left, taking with her her roots and memories only, and leaving her sisters in rows of 3 lonely. But 2 days later, after a day of rain and a day of sun, Pink and the other radishes looked over at the hole where Blair's roots had run, and saw a little green sprout, a minuscule 2-leaf tree, a radish yet to be.
Created using Powtoon.